everyone. My name is Michelle Webb, and I'm the program manager for Longmont Department of Public Safety's Criminal Justice Diversion Programs. We're grateful to have you here for our panel on human connection as harm reduction, how one public safety department is using the power of relationships and lived experience to heal its community. I'd like to introduce our panel. Emily Van Doren supervises a team of public safety-based peer case managers who advocate for community members in Longmont, Colorado, who are experiencing addiction and mental health disorders. Working in the behavioral health field for over 10 years, she values a recovery-oriented, strengths-based approach and strongly believes in approaching this work rooted in the principles of harm reduction. Emily and her team compassionately serve the community through acceptance and partnership. They emphasize self-determination while valuing the journey of meeting people where they are at and caring enough not to stop there. In fact, that last part is literally Emily's team's mission statement. Annabelle is a peer case manager who works for Longmont Public Safety's Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion Program and also serves as part of the broader public safety case management team. Annabelle compassionately walks alongside her participants to help them connect with resources in the community that will positively impact their life. She is able to relate to her participants and build relationships with them by sharing her own recovery story. Focusing on harm reduction and a sense of mutuality, Annabelle works with her participants to build community and improve their overall quality of life. Unfortunately, due to unexpected circumstances, our Assistant Public Safety Chief, Dan Eamon, and the supervisor of our Crisis Outreach Response and Engagement Team, which is our co-responder team, Sergeant Andy Feaster, are unable to join us today. After Emily and Annabelle are finished presenting, we'll be happy to answer your questions as time allows. So with that, I will turn it over to Emily to start us off.
Thanks, Michelle. So today we're going to talk about the work being done by our case management team within the Public Safety Department in Longmont, Colorado, as well as share how nearly every part of our work is intentionally rooted in relationship and why we believe this matters. So our first slide, you're going to see our mission statement. We coined this as our mission statement probably about a year and a half ago. And Michelle kind of shared a little bit about it in our intros, but as evident by the statement, our work is focused on building genuine human connection, which values partnership, compassion, and self-determination. Although this is not a novel idea, it does have the potential to be lost and sometimes all too easily when we're working with people who may be making choices that negatively impact or even harm their health and well-being. All community members referred to our case management team are struggling with behavioral health disorders that often include serious and persistent mental illness and a substance use disorder. Throughout the presentation, we'll provide examples of participant stories that we believe were positively impacted by our ability to meet the participant where they're at while caring enough not to stop there.
This slide is just a little overview of the points that we're going to talk on today. We're going to review how someone gets connected into case management, what happens once they're connected, why we believe relationship matters with real life examples, and a few recovery stories along the way.
So the image you see on the right-hand side of the screen illustrates the 4 referral pathways to our case management team. The 4 pathways all connect to our team of peer case managers. And the acronyms and program names that you see on that slide are our co-responder team. So CORE stands for Crisis Outreach Response and Engagement, LEAD, Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion, the Angel Initiative, and our Community Health Program. We aren't going to go into the details of each of these programs right now in the presentation, but we'll be ready to answer any questions that you may have about the nuances or the differences between these referral pathways in the Q&A portion. really the importance of this slide is to emphasize that it is important to our core values as a team to keep our referral pathways diverse, to meet the diverse ways in which people seek and connect with support, while maintaining clarity and definition in our mission and services. So in other words, although a participant may get referred to our team in any number of ways, what happens following the referral is the same. So let's pretend that someone has been referred to our team and first contact with case manager has happened. Starting at that very first contact, we focus on building meaningful relationship. So the quote you read here is from the book Lost Connections by Johan Hari. In his book, Hari dives into research and real life examples that highlight reconnection to others, help people feel less depressed and less anxious. In this quote, Hari is referring to evidence that reconnection helped an isolated and vulnerable community tackle a problem that seemed insurmountable. The point being, they aligned as peers and their quality of life improved.
And this kind of brings us to what a peer means to us on our case management teams. And it just means, you know, we're able to stand by the participant's side and walk that path with them. It's different from the traditional title as peer. Our team has a really diverse collection of lived experience to pull from when matching a case manager with the new participant. We have, you know, substance use, mental health challenges, teen pregnancy, all these things as lived experience to pull from. And it really helps, you know, when we're able to just intentionally think about who we are going to pair together. So. Sorry, I wasn't supposed to cut.
Okay.
All right, the next story I'm going to share is one of our oldest participants, well, but one of our participants who's been in our program the longest. And this is Leah's story. Leah and her partner were Lead's first official referrals. The referral was completed over the weekend prior to our launch date in July of 2018. The referring officer had known Leah and her partner for several years and felt their current circumstances was the perfect social referral into Lead. And throughout the course of Leah, she had started to feel, let me back up. Upon first meeting Leah and her partner, our work with them started and ended with the two of them being treated as one person. And fast forward to now, throughout the work of, you know, or the course of working with her, she has started to feel empowered and acknowledge that caring for herself can and will lead to caring for each other versus the other way around. It has taken strength, courage, and persistence to build their own identities separate from one another. And this has ultimately led to each of them establishing their own journey, even when they remain in a relationship with one another. Reportedly, Leah's engagement with the Lead program and her relationship with her case manager has saved her life. Leah and her current case manager relate as peers in a number of ways, from shared life experience all the way down to how they navigate domestic partner relationships. Both of them identify as strong, independent women, and this manifests in their shared humor and outlook on life. Leah has found safety confiding in her case manager, knowing that they share similar ways of processing events, and that her case manager will be there to support her through it all. Just recently, Leah began working as a peer advocate herself and is grounded in the ways of being able to set boundaries that help her live a healthier life.
So before we move on, I want to just share that we'll be using the visual aid of throughout the slides of a light bulb lighting up throughout a story being described. And this is meant to illustrate how we make or how genuine human connection will allow the light within each of us to shine. It's also meant to signal where human connection has positively impacted the person and those around them, therefore reducing harm. So I'm going to turn it back over to Annabelle, and she's going to share her own story of recovery.
So here's our lights. And there's me. Like Leah, I also have a story of codependent struggles, addiction, and the healing that can take place through human connection. And all right, so here we go. When I was 5, my life was flipped over, upside down. At that time, my mom was in the throes of a destructive addiction to opiates and alcohol, and my family decided to stage an intervention where they were tired of her stealing from her friends and family and the reckless choices she was making, which endangered her and everyone around her. They gave her an ultimatum: get clean or you're gonna lose Annabelle. My mom accepted the help they offered, and the next day she was on her way to treatment in Arizona. The director of the facility drove up to Colorado to take her down to rehab. Before even making it outside of Denver, he flipped the van on I-25 due to the heavy wet snow that Colorado sometimes gets in April. The van rolled 12 times, and my mom was left with a serious traumatic brain injury and many broken bones, and never ended up making it to treatment. To make a long story short, the ironic ending was my mom was given pain pills upon pain pills to help her with her new traumatic physical ailments. As the years went on, it seemed like I was the only one to witness my mother's battle with addiction and mental health struggles. It was hard for me to comprehend and watch as she would blow through her prescription in days and spend so much of her time withdrawing or sleeping in bed. The constant ups and downs led to some very traumatic events when dealing with my mother's mental health. She attempted suicide a number of times and would often have explosive outbursts while we were out in public. My family's support to my mother diminished, and she didn't have a program like LEAD to turn to when things got tough. My mother and I's relationship developed into a codependent mess, and I was quickly having to learn how to be the parent to my mother. This, coupled with puberty and teenage angst, led to some very rough teenage years. The summer before 9th grade, I turned to drugs and alcohol to help me numb the pain. At this point, I was smoking weed every day, and things were escalating pretty fast. By the time I started 9th grade at Longmont High School, I began using cocaine often. Coke was the first drug that I realized could help me escape. When I used it, I could be someone else and leave all my troubles behind. I didn't care about what was going on at home as long as I stayed high. With all that going on, I attended school very infrequently. By middle school, my teachers were ready to deem me a truant, but didn't because I was still able to pass my classes despite my poor attendance. However, by the time I entered high school, things weren't coming as easy, and I didn't do well with all of that freedom that came with high school. Even if I made it to school, I often didn't last a full day. By lunch, I would find someone to go and get high with, and the high school teachers ended up reporting me as a truant to the courts. Pretty soon, I found myself in front of our local magistrate. His name was Tajani Cole, and he presided over those truancy cases. And in 2005, Judge Cole was the Boulder County magistrate who presided over one of the juvenile dockets at the Boulder County Justice Center. He was also the principal of Justice High, and Justice High is a small charter school designed for at-risk youth who are chronically truant or involved in the criminal justice system in some way. At that time, Justice High was located inside the Boulder County Justice Center. The courtrooms and the tiny pretrial offices not only served as such, but they also served as our classrooms when court was not in session. Judge Cole ended up ordering me to Justice High. After a few months, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time, and that was the feeling of belonging. I was being held to a higher standard by the teachers and by Cole, who were able to use the power of human connection to get to know me, and found out that I was an intelligent girl who had just gotten lost along the way. It was the first time I didn't feel judged of my shortcomings or my past transgressions. Rather, I was encouraged to make the decisions I felt were right for me, even if the outcomes weren't the best. Cole always made sure that we were fully aware of what the consequences would be, whether that was picking up the phone, and calling our probation officers or doling out exercise as physical punishment, which he coined bad and nasties. Students were mandated to play sports and participate in other school activities like science bowl and moot court. This is what Judge Cole would later refer to as Justice High's form of harm reduction. He knew that if he could prevent us from using even just one day before the big game, that was a win. And I say a big game loosely because Justice High had an 8-man football team that I don't think we ever won one game, but it was fun nonetheless. Our girls, however, did kick ass at tennis, and that was a lot of fun. I was able to excel at Justice High, and I stopped using cocaine. I lettered in cheerleading and tennis and took AP classes and traveled the world as a student at Justice High. During this time, things at home weren't getting better. In fact, they were getting a lot worse. My mom's spiral into addiction had worsened, and she was intravenously using substances at this point and was hardly ever home. In May of 2007, just 3 months after I had my first son, I graduated from high school. I also graduated in the top of my class, which wasn't hard because there was only 11 of us. But making it to graduation was the real victory. And I made it to graduation because of the passion and commitment of the Justice High staff, not to mention the healing that had taken place from my life, in my life, from the human connections I found along the way. And even though this wasn't the end of my recovery story, not even close, I learned how important a relationship like the one I built with Judge Cole is. Judge Cole and Justice High did things differently. They were able to break down barriers for the students they served in order for us to be successful and get that diploma. That is what excites me so much about LEAD. We are given the opportunity and support to do things differently for the people we serve. And I forgot to light my lights up. I do this every time, but my light then lights up to the justice system and then lights up to the community because I'm now able to serve my community and, just share that with the people around me. So thank you. Thanks for listening to my story, guys.
Thanks, Annabelle. So our next story is going to be that of John's. John is a participant who, prior to referral, generated many calls for service based on his behavior in the community, and frequently those calls would be generated in the course of just hours. As a result of this behavior, John had become isolated despite a very positive view of his life, as he didn't have a home, was not employed, and would ride or walk around town when under the influence. He was not allowed to access several community services that would otherwise serve him because of his erratic behavior. And John also didn't like his interactions with law enforcement and would often become antagonistic towards officers who are responsible to respond to the call for service. We started building relationship with John by simply being interested in how he saw himself, what contributed to him waking up every day, and what contributed to his use. The biggest factor for John around his use was the lack of a home. We were able to place John in an apartment through our pseudo housing first model with a community partner. John was immediately placed with a roommate, and we walked alongside him as the good, bad, and the ugly unfolded. Cohabitating with a stranger is not easy. But at each new experience, we focused on providing a platform for John to build new skills and build healthy relationship with those around him. Because of this and because of who John is, he was able to reconnect with his mom and started to heal their relationship. He got to a point where he was ready to attend substance use treatment, decided which treatment program was the best fit for him, and successfully participated in that treatment program for nearly 10 months. As all of this was unfolding, he started to heal his relationship with patrol. And today reflects how his level of respect and admiration for law enforcement is more present than ever in his life. From his perspective, being referred to our case management team was the first time law enforcement truly protected and served him. John has since returned to Longmont, has not had a single call for service since he was housed in 2018, and is currently working and peacefully cohabitating with his mom. So the next slide, you'll see another quote from Johann Hari's book, Lost Connections. And what we just reviewed are several stories or examples of the power of peer relationships. Of course, just because someone's referred into our team or to our team, that doesn't mean they're ready to embark on this work with us. Another core value of our team is, and which makes our team unique, is that we're committed to assertive community-based outreach, meaning we're not simply calling people a few times to introduce our program in hopes of building relationship with them.
And an example of this would be Nicole's story. A year ago in March, when COVID restrictions were first put into place, we received a referral for Nicole. She was experiencing homelessness and didn't have a good phone number to reach her on. Typically, when this kind of referral comes in, we would turn to street outreach. But because of COVID, our assertive community-based outreach was put on hold. This meant we weren't hitting the streets to find people, and people just without good contact information, they weren't coming to us. So what then? We had to get creative. This meant contacting the officer who referred Nicole in to see if he had any information, any frequented places, any other, associates of Nicole's that we could try to contact. And still to no avail. I was never able to connect with Nicole over the phone about her referral. Cut to 4 months later in June, I saw that Nicole had been arrested and taken to jail. Jail is always a good place to outreach people because it's, easy connection. I wrote Nicole a letter introducing myself and the LEAD program. I explained to her that I had been trying to speak to her for months now with no such luck. Within a couple weeks, I had a letter back from Nicole explaining that she was so grateful to have received that letter. It came to her 2 days after she had been arrested. And she said in the first time in a long time, she had felt hope about her future. And she had mentioned that she had wished she had reached out to me back in March when she was referred in.
So far, we've given you all a glimpse of how we focus on relationship with our participants. We also want to invite you to take a step back with us and understand how we emphasize relationship in every layer of our work. We are a team that relies on our community and our own department to keep us working. Our ability to build a relationship with law enforcement and community partners ultimately makes the greatest impact on health, well-being, and safety of our community. So typically, this is where we would turn it to Dan Eman, our Assistant Public Safety Chief, and Sergeant Andy Feaster, the Sergeant of our Co-Responder Unit, describe the unique approach of building our case management team within the Public Safety Department versus creating a partnership with an agency who already provides case management services. Since they're not able to be here today, I'm going to try to do this part justice. And again, if there's questions in the Q&A portion that we end up not being able to answer for them, we'll definitely help, close the loop and get those answers back to people. So on the outset of building this model, it was clear in order to create buy-in and true collaboration with law enforcement, we were going to need to be part of the family. Additionally, those responsible for manifesting this vision understood a value our department has held for a long time, which was and continues to be officer discretion. There was and is trust that officers make hard choices about the most appropriate way to navigate the legal system to address complex behavior every day, all day. It's the most consistent aspect of their job. Of course, depending on the department, there may or may not be limited tools to use when navigating options within the legal system. But knowing and navigating the tools available is part of an officer's job responsibilities. So we were building this model on the back of 2 specific programs, one of them being the LEAD program, Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion. In order to be referred to the LEAD program in Longmont, an officer needs to interact with someone they believe will benefit from intensive community-based case management as a way to address their behavioral health concerns, which will ultimately decrease calls for service. We expected and were prepared to work with some of our most vulnerable community members who cycle through municipal and county court systems, return to jail for similar charges relatively close together, and who often seek medical care through the emergency department, despite their concern either being more psychosocial in need or medical care more appropriately treated in the outpatient setting. We chose to keep our eligibility criteria diverse and expansive, knowing we could always narrow later if we needed to. Our referral process, simple, and our case managers prepared to do the hard work of providing learning opportunities and partnership with law enforcement every step of the way. So an example of the importance of respecting value of officer discretion, I personally experienced what can happen when that value isn't overtly upheld. As I was acclimating to the work within public safety, I was genuinely curious to understand what influenced an officer deciding what makes an appropriate referral. I had the opportunity to ask this question in genuine curiosity, but given the circumstance of the situation, by the time the question was received by the officer, the genuine curiosity was absolutely lost, and it was interpreted as me questioning their ability to discern if the person, the participant, was an appropriate referral. Because I recognized in this interaction that that value was lost, I slowed myself down and I engaged with the officer where he was at, recognizing I needed to pause and spend time understanding his experience and expertise as a patrol officer. And spending time building relationship with him, he also engaged in getting to know our work a bit more and has come to understand and value our approach, even if it isn't something he can always adopt within his role as a patrol officer. In other words, he respects the differences in our roles, the differences in our approaches, and the differences in our expertise. He understands we're trying to work in conjunction with police on a continuum versus replacing him. He's now one of our top referring officers, having referred the second highest number of participants from a single officer. We believe that our work with participants in conjunction with our thoughtful approach to understanding the responsibility and craft of policing helps participants take advantage of an opportunity to build a different relationship with our public safety department, specifically our law enforcement officers, and in turn, impacts their ability to build relationship with our community. So we have one more story to share today, and that story is Eusebius. So prior to being referred to case management in 2018, Eusebio interacted with patrol nearly every day and often multiple times a day. He had been experiencing homelessness for nearly 15 years and is a monolingual Spanish speaker. Because Eusebio generated so many calls for service, it was only natural for law enforcement to start to become desensitized to Eusebio's life circumstance and struggle. Many officers cared deeply for him, but felt a lack of ability to change the cycle he often found himself in, and started to become frustrated with the repeat nature of their interactions with him. We illustrate this as a light turning off because for Eusebio and law enforcement, their relationship was understandably strained. So enter case management. Through our work with Eusebio, we connected with medical care, housing, and successfully worked with him to terminate his probation through meeting all of the expectations of probation. He renewed his permanent residency documents despite having lost the documents many years prior, and received OAP, or old age pension. Today, newly hired officers did not know Eusebio's name, something that seemed unfathomable 2 years ago to officers who have worked in the department for many years. Eusebio has always respected law enforcement, but now he is in a place where he can interact with them on his terms, thank them for their service and their belief in him. So in closing, we want to wrap up on this hopeful note. Our case management team has been in existence for only a little over 2.5 years. All of the examples and stories we shared today unfolded within the course of those short years. We feel empowered by the realization if all of this can happen in that time frame, imagine what's possible. I feel like we're just getting started. That's the end. We'll open it up for questions.
Thank you, Emily and Annabelle. Yes, we have quite a few participants, so please, we would love to hear from you all and answer any questions that you have. Feel free to jump in.
And if they want to ask their question verbally, they can raise their hand and I can allow them to talk so that they can ask the questions to you directly if they don't want to type them out.
Thank you, Eli. We appreciate that. We can wait just a little bit longer to see if anyone has anything. There might be people furiously typing right now. Emily and Annabelle, I'm trying to think of questions I've heard people ask in the past after your presentation. Oh, here comes one right now.
Yes, we are.
Yeah.
So the question is, are you keeping track on progress for future assessment? So I'm going to turn that one over to you to kind of talk about the program management part.
Sure. So that's a great question, and we are doing that. As part of the funding that we receive, we are required to have a program evaluation conducted. So we actually have 2 independent evaluations that are being done. We're expected to receive the results from both of them in the fall of 2022. So we still have a little ways to go. We are capturing all of the data. One evaluation is asking for very specific types of information that comes from assessment data, and they're gathering their own data outside of that. And then we have another evaluation where they'll be focused on various outcomes, looking at municipal arrests, summons, transports to the emergency room, that kind of thing, to see if things have increased or decreased. The challenge for us right now is, as Emily mentioned, we're a little over 2.5 years into the program, but we're still about 1.5 years out from getting our evaluation results. So we are in the process right now of developing an interim measure where we can take sort of the minimal amount of data that we can, but start to get a gauge, at least on a quarterly basis, to see, are we moving the needle on things? So that's something that we're hoping within the next 6 months we'll have completed. It's a new initiative for us. It's literally just gotten underway in the past month. So there are a lot of things that need to come together for that, because it's no small effort, it's time intensive. Hopefully that answers your question.
So I guess I have a question again, because I worked on lead stuff for, it was 2 years of my life. Oh, you actually have a question right now. I don't know if I'm more important than the actual attendees.
Well, it looks like we have time though, so
Yeah.
we still
Okay.
have.
Yeah. So one of the things that, you know, I was most interested in, and I feel that a lot of people didn't pay attention to, was Catherine Beckett's work on the original LEAD program. She has this great essential guideline that I think all LEAD programs should really take advantage of and follow, but it was never published in a peer-reviewed journal. It is sort of buried on the original LEAD website, which has been redone over and over again. And I really wonder why this was sort of done, but it outlines a great plan for following up with, you know, stories with individuals at a later time. So I think it would actually be a great asset to you going forward, that it breaks down, you know, everything they learned from the first 2 years, the way that they should have done things. And I just want to ask if you're aware that that piece of literature is out there, because I think it would be a great resource for you.
So I'm not aware of that, but I feel like the timing for hearing about this is perfect since we're getting that initiative underway. I would love to take a look at that. So we have a really close relationship with the National Bureau. So I imagine I could reach out to them to get a copy of that and look at it and see how it might guide us in what we're trying to put together.
Yeah, and the document is completely free online. I think you can even Google Catherine Beckett, the first two lessons, the lessons learned from the first 2 years of LEAD. And I don't know why she never pursued to get it published in a peer-reviewed journal. I do know that she helped craft a lot of the initial early stuff, but she was never officially on board with LEAD. She was just at the university at the time they went to her for guidance, and she crafted that document. And I don't know why it's not as popular. Even in my own, you know, master's thesis, I cited it a lot as something that was really important going forward. And it was just sort of surprising that it still isn't getting that much attention, with LEAD kind of proliferating more and more. Yeah, so you have other questions now, because I could just talk and ask more questions about this, but I shouldn't hog up the time.
Well, I will say before we move on that I can credit Catherine for helping me for my interview for this.
Oh.
I found that document and read it before my interview, and it really has. You're right, Eli. It really has helped kind of drive, kind of continuing to be rooted in the philosophy we described and learning from exactly what she articulates in that lessons learned. So yeah, it's helpful.
Yeah, and I do know, I think they support now up to 4 years of follow-up with LEAD clients to see if the program really tracks. Of course, I think we all know that funding might not be there for 4 years post follow-up to continue with things like that, but I'm an advocate, of course we should follow these people for years to really track that they're getting the help that they need. All right, so you have a live question and a couple of questions in the chat now.
So I see Naja's question on what has been the most, or what has surprised us the most in utilizing this approach in Longmont. I'll go ahead, I'll answer that one, and you talk to Michelle and Annabelle about that, and then let's get to the live question. What surprised me most? I think for me, it was really just my own personal journey. I had worked in Longmont previously and interacted with our public safety department in my previous work. It was a similar role, just with our community mental health center. And my perspective was quite different of law enforcement prior to becoming a part of public safety. And there have been lots of surprises along the way, but I think that's probably the most profound to me is, and what I'm most grateful for actually, is because I feel like because of that expanded perspective, we're able to address systems barriers in a different way than I was previously able to do, having, you know, a kind of outside perspective, or I don't know, that's even simplified, but just in the way in which I interacted with law enforcement before. And I would like to hope, and I'd like to think that that has positively impacted outcomes for our participants as well. Do you two have any surprises you want to share?
I can read out the Q&A question. I don't know if you can actually see that or not. It's from Isa De Jong. Your organization sounds great. It sounds very important to know the person. I'm from the Netherlands, and a huge problem in Amsterdam is that emergency calls increase for bewildered people. These people are often unknown to the police, can be foreigners, drug tourism related, homeless people, etc. Is there something from your program we could still use for this response?
I imagine so, yes. It's a really good question. I think part of it, at least, you know, even for our law enforcement department, I mean, we have plenty of people our law enforcement officers interact with who are traveling through, you know, may not call Longmont their home community, may have similar, you know, kind of activity that you're describing while they're in our community. While at the same time, you know, kind of being rooted in harm reduction and recognizing a whole person and not just the behavior that's in our face, remaining genuinely curious, which I think is always important, can help, you know, kind of address what's going to help this person move on, right? And get to maybe what their original plan was, if it was, you know, to move through or visiting, or to just kind of help with reconnection to resources that have been helpful in the past, and maybe they're creating community in your community. I could be totally missing the mark on your question. I've never been to the Netherlands, so I could be missing some cultural stuff there too, but that's my best attempt at answering the question.
I think you answered it really well, Emily. And I would actually like to back up, excuse me, to the previous question and talk about just one thing from a program management standpoint. So from the perspective of someone who isn't a social worker, who doesn't have a background working with individuals who struggle in this way, is, and I know from other folks with similar backgrounds in our department, I think it was more of an expectation we had that things were going to happen so fast. We would see change happen quickly. And what we've learned, and it isn't surprising looking in hindsight and now learning, excuse me, along the way, is that it takes time. I mean, the power of relationships, to build a relationship, to support someone on their journey takes time, and to see that change takes time. So, you know, many of the stories and the stories that Emily and Annabelle shared today, you know, are people who they've been working with for a long time. And, you know, we're finding, we don't know yet, we'll see when the evaluation comes out, but it seems like it's somewhere in that 2-year mark where we start to, you know, the case managers see transformations along the way, and they may be, you know, what may seem like baby steps, but they're huge milestones that people are meeting. But, you know, stepping back a few layers from the outside, it can take that long before other people can recognize that really remarkable change that people are experiencing. So I really appreciate Emily's patience too, you know, when she talked earlier about building relationships within the department. I mean, that was with me, that was with other people. too, who didn't have the expertise that she has, that we had these expectations and we had to build relationship, and she had a lot of patience helping us to catch up, or meeting us where we were at too. So that's one thing I wanted to share.
I guess I would also just add that I urge to try and keep as close tabs on these individuals as possible. I know that it's a difficult population to work with. It was a difficult population for us to keep track of because we wanted to keep track of their narratives sort of the same way that you are. The original LEAD program was only able to even reach, I think, 40 of their original 272 participants. They could only get 40 of them to even come back and tell their narratives, which is hard to, I guess, sell is the only way that I can think of it. Hard to sell that your program worked when you're only speaking to 40 of the 270, because the population can often be transient, have no means of getting in contact with other people. So one of the things that we sort of did was like proliferate a phone number, like a Google Voice phone number out that their case managers could go and reach like our research team at a later time so that they could stay in contact with us and follow up with us on things. And that was useful for keeping in contact with people who really wanted to tell their stories continually as time goes on. I know one of my colleagues that handled more of that side, because I was more the stats person than the actual qualitative work, and the narratives that she was collecting were very similar to the narratives that you're collecting now. So I think it's incredibly valuable to try and keep as much contact with the population as much as possible. Even after they've completed, they've gone through everything and they have no need for the program anymore.
Yeah, I think that's where, kind of that relationship, comes into play. We actually have, without getting into the nitty gritty of it, but recognizing that importance and recognizing the people that we enter their life, they allow us to be a part of their life, and we care about them and we want to check in with them. So even when, maybe that hard work is done, the work of the day-to-day kind of grind of the intensive case management. So like Leah, for example, that we shared, we very much are still in connection with her. Awesome. She was able to come yesterday actually to one of our operational work groups, which is a big community meeting that we hold for participants and kind of addressing systems community. And she presented as her professional self at our operational work group. And that just, that relationship with her, that's not going to change. Like, we're going to be there with her, which is just, it keeps us going, and likewise, I think she would say that.
I think so too.
Yeah, it was really great to have her be there in a different role with our group and have her participating. We probably have time for one more question. I do want to say, in case anyone's typing, I appreciate Christine sharing the link to the Catherine Beckett report. Well, I wasn't familiar with her name as I'm scrolling through this. It's very familiar to me from probably about 3.5 years ago when we were researching and looking at just these lessons learned that are so much focused on relationships. That's what each lesson ties back to that. And Emily and the team have done a really great job of incorporating each of those components, which is just really cool to see. So.
Yeah, and I think she's written other pieces and then has mentioned LEAD in the pieces, even though it's not in the title, it's not in the keywords, it's not in anything. She'll just cite back to LEAD. So it is I think it's I can see now that Emily agreed that it's an incredibly valuable article. All right, so no problem, Christine. So we are out of time now.
Okay.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us. All of our contact information, I believe you'll find on Whova, so please feel free to reach out if you have questions down the road.
Thanks so much.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.